Hey, it's Megan. Welcome back to On Writing. If you're new here, I'm a professional writer and writing coach. And today we're talking about what is a premise and do we need one? A premise isn't the same thing as an idea or a theme. An idea is anything that sparks further creative thinking, a what-if scenario, a certain scene, a unique character, a conversation, things like that. Anything that you start with and then it branches into something bigger. A theme is an idea that is consistently seen throughout your story. Revenge, rebellion, growth, healing, love, loyalty, and so on. But a premise is a succinct one-line statement that fully encapsulates your main character's journey from the start to the finish of your story. It shows where they start and where they end up, and thus can become the very basic first version of your outline. Now, I have to give credit to a Hungarian-American playwright, Lajos Egri, because he wrote about this type of a premise in his book, The Art of Dramatic Writing, which is really great if you want to pick it up. Linked below. But essentially, a premise is a type of philosophical statement that gets at the deepest, most essential learning that your character experiences throughout your story. It's something they don't know or disagree with at the start that by the end of their story they are going to agree with. And it has 3 parts. So the first part of the premise represents and highlights where your character begins. The second part, the verb, representing the middle of your story or the story itself, really. And then the third part representing where your character ends up. So let's use The Great Gatsby as an example. Let's say the premise of The Great Gatsby is excessive desire leads to tragic consequences. So the first part is where Gatsby starts out. Excessive desire. This should inform the world that he's living in and the choices he's making at the start of the story. So if we were writing Gatsby together, we would want the first part of our story to really show him in the midst of his excessive desires, leaning into that and being in a place where he does not think that that's going to lead to tragic consequences. And then the last part is where Gatsby ends up, those tragic consequences. So the rest of the story, really everything after the catalyst, should show him moving more and more toward tragic consequences and learning eventually that those consequences are a result of his excessive desire. That way, at the start of your story, you know where Gatsby is at internally. By the end of the story, you know where he's at internally. And then your job is to figure out how he gets there. But that's how it forms the basis of your outline. Because every plot point, every obstacle, every conflict should get your main character to wrestle with that premise in some way and move them closer to understanding it. And we know how to shape those plot points because we know ultimately what they're aiming to do in our main character's life, what their point is, the point of our points. Does that make sense? Let's look at another example. Let's take The Green Mile. Our main character is Paul. We want to think about what does he learn by the end that he doesn't know at the beginning. So something that comes to mind for me is maybe witnessing miracles or witnessing the supernatural leads to deeper appreciation of life, or maybe even leads to personal or spiritual transformation. So at the start of the story, Paul has to not think that witnessing miracles would lead to deeper appreciation of life or transformation, any of that. He would have to disagree. In fact, at the start of the story, he's very rational and practical. However, through the obstacles and events of the story, that belief, which is opposite to the premise at the start, is challenged. And by the end, Paul should get to a place where he agrees with the premise and realizes it's true because of what he's gone through during the story. So this is why I love teaching writing using a premise, because it can help you ground all of your plot points in your character's arc so that you always know where they're going and why. So how do you come up with the premise for your story if you already have an idea or you've already started working on your story? Great question. I'm really glad you asked that. Start with brainstorming things that you think your main character could learn by the end of the story that they don't know at the start. What would that be and why? Really, it should be something that you've learned, that you believe is worth learning, worth putting a character through trials for in order to learn, but it could be something that feels true to the story you've already started as well. And sometimes it takes a little second to really figure it out and land on something concrete enough to stand as the foundation of your outline. But just remember that the structure of the sentence itself matters, because the first part speaks to where your character starts, informs the first part of your story. Then you have your verb, the middle of the premise, and that could be anything. Leads to, destroys, promotes, fosters, breaks down, whatever you feel like describes your story the best. And then the last part should reflect where your character ends up, and ultimately the whole premise together with its 3 parts is that one statement that summarizes what your character learns. Tragic consequences for Gatsby as a result of his excessive desire, or an appreciation of life or spiritual transformation for Paul because he witnessed miracles. If you're having trouble coming up with a premise for your story, leave a comment below and we can chat about it. I'd love to help you work that out. But otherwise, I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have questions below, and I will see you next time. Happy writing.